Hey folks, so I thought I would do a video talking about the idea of Twistzz joining Liquid, as it seems like we have multiple reports and even somewhat official word from Liquid that this is going on. It started back all the way on April 7th whenever we actually had a report come out from Nell, a guy who does a lot of talking in the French scene, about how Misfits were about to acquire the French duo of DevilDuva and Amanek. I don't know how to pronounce his name, so sorry, I probably butchered that, but I'm just going to say Amanek for this video. And so that kind of came out, and so when that happened, you also had DK, talking about that and how that likely meant that Twistzz was going to be going to Liquid and that relics would also be dropped from Misfits. And while there was really no confirmation from the organizations at the time, I know that a tweet did came out from DK, which said that the CEO of Misfits, Ben Spunt, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, said that I can confirm that there will be roster changes forthcoming to Misfits lineup, but didn't specify what those would actually be. But now we're starting to see it unravel, and we're really getting the details now, because there was a report that just came out again from DK this morning here on April the 12th that in fact Liquid had signed Twistzz, and then not so long after that it was Team Liquid who did put out a tweet very recently saying that I believe the exact language was something along the lines of that Twistzz would be standing in for Team Liquid CSGO for EPL matches tonight, the night that I'm recording this video on April 12th. But then just a couple hours before announcing that Twistzz would be standing in, they had made already another announcement about their CSGO team, basically saying they were starting a boot camp. So, when they're starting a boot camp, it seems like you're making an investment on whatever it is that you have right there. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to build something, you're trying to grind, you're trying to put things together. And it seems like perfect timing when a new player is coming into the team on a long-term basis that you'd want to have a boot camp towards the beginning to, figure out how you're going to make things work, how he's going to fit in, how you want to plan things for long-term, and get prepared for some events coming up, because obviously Liquid is going to be at CS Summit. They're also going to be at DreamHack Austin. And all of these events I'm talking about are within the next 2 to 3 weeks. So I would imagine their boot camp would last until CS Summit, for example, and they would really get to debut their lineup and test things out with it, get a couple events under their belt, figure out what they need to adjust, and then move forward. So when you piece all of this together, it looks very likely like Twistzz is not just simply going to be a stand-in, that he's probably likely going to be the fit to the team, maybe unless things don't work out, maybe it is some type of trial basis, but it seems like, all signs point to him likely being signed, and it's just at this point a matter of semantics and legal, how can I put this, just like kind of dancing around it because of legal reasons and things like that. So did want to just kind of announce that those moves have been talked about, and it seems pretty likely it's going to happen first off, and now just kind of give my thoughts on the move. So the way that I first found out about Twistzz as a player was actually way back when he was playing with SKDC, SapphireKelowna.com, which was like a nightclub in Canada that Ocean was a security for or something like that. And they always used to use that name even back in 1.6 way back when, and then they brought it in CSGO. And I will give props to Ocean because he was the one giving a lot of some of the young professional players kind of their first play in CSGO. And, obviously Selfless, really known for scouting out talent and then moving them along to other teams. So Ryu, a big part of that. But Ocean was also a guy who would give these young players a chance on his team, mostly because his team was more towards the bottom of the pro league standings. And so he was the kind of guy who was in more of a position to take risk on young talent to see if he could pick up people, make his team a bit stronger, make sure that they could avoid relegation or demotion, and perhaps even, do decent and do something in the league. And so they were a bit more prone to try out people from main or Premier or Pug Stars or whatever you want to call them and give them some of their first chances. I mean, and there's a lot of players that came through Ocean's teams, by the way, that people recognize. I'm pretty sure Relics played for SKDC at a time. Obviously, Stewie 2K, he did some playing for SKDC. And there's a bunch of names that I'm just not thinking of right now that are certainly examples as well that I'm sure people will name later or something. But Twistzz was another one of these players who did come through this team and looked pretty sharp in online play while he's playing for them. And it wasn't too much longer after that, pretty early on there, that you actually saw him trying out for TSM, because their original lineup way back at the beginning of 2016 was actually going to have Vice in it, because it was like Vice and Sick, and then it was Simphis and FNS, and then they had Automatic as well, and that was the original 5. And then things didn't work out with Vice, and they only played like maybe a few best of 3s in a couple of different qualification rounds before they got rid of Vice. And then they were actually playing with Adren a little bit, so it looked like maybe Adren might join, and he actually went back to Liquid, of course, for MLG Columbus. And then so they actually went and they picked up this guy Twistzz, and at the time, he's very young, 16 years old. Only professional experience he really had was playing a brief bit here with this SKDC team on ESEA and things like that. And so he comes on this TSM team, and I was watching him play, and, obviously watching him play, this guy, very young, very skilled rifler, had pretty sick aim, good mechanics. Like, you could definitely see that there was some potential in this player, just from a pure, like, skill ceiling and mechanical standpoint. And when he was playing some of his first offline events, again, very inexperienced. He's going to the ECS LAN, and he's playing up against top teams. He went up against the big North American team Cloud9 and beat them in a best of 3. Also had some pretty decent games against some of the elite European teams, though losses. They were very close scores, and he looked very competitive. And so some of his first attempts at playing an offline actually did look not too shabby at this ECS event. And then even at Northern Ring in Toronto, he did pretty well there individually at the E-League Minor. Struggled a bit with Cloud9, the best of 3 loss, but in some of the opening games against the Brazilians and such, and some of the like mid-tier or lower-tier NA teams, he looked fine with TSM offline. So, his first debuts or whatever you want to call it in offline play actually looked pretty solid for someone who was quite young and quite inexperienced, and all of his online play was looking good as well. On TSM, you saw him play a lot of peripheral roles, so a lot more lurking, a lot more kind of last guy in type of situation, a lot of cleanup duties and things like that. But there are also certain maps and certain situations where he could be a bit more assertive for them, particularly on Cobblestone. At times you would see him be a bit more assertive and a bit more aggressive, and maybe certain strats would call for him to be a guy who needs to take a little bit more initiative in a round or something like that. But mostly he kind of played more peripheral roles and things of that nature. The thing is, when he was on TSM, I feel like he got overshadowed because a player like Sick was always the one that was seen more as more impressive. He's someone who people had an eye on, and obviously Automatic also came out of this team, looked pretty good at ECS and E-League and things like that. Obviously Twistzz couldn't play at E-League because he was too young. That's when TSM had to use Kaden as a stand-in. But guys like Automatic and Sick were kind of taking the limelight a little bit on this TSM team, particularly Sick being the other youthful fragger that seemed to be really flashy, and then Automatic obviously making the move to Cloud9 and making a big name for himself on that team, whereas before he really didn't get much name recognition. But either way, Twistzz certainly still looked like a promising talent on this TSM team. And obviously TSM kind of turns into Misfits, basically, right? Some roster moves involved in that. Obviously Simphis, going over to Splice, FNS back over on CLG, and then, of course, Sean Gares and Shazam coming in. But Sick and Twistzz had been on the team from almost the very beginnings, and then someone like Relics had joined after Automatic left for C9. And on Misfits, Twistzz looked fairly sharp as well. They went to that DreamHack Vegas event. They played up against Virtus Pro and Fnatic. Both of them map losses, but the map against Virtus Pro and Cobblestone was actually quite a competitive game. Against Fnatic, it was a little bit more one-sided, but individually, still Twistzz was putting up numbers. Is at least something you can pull out of this when you're thinking about Twistzz as a player. And when you look at almost all of the recent online play that Twistzz was playing with on Misfits, when it comes to like the DreamHack Austin qualifiers or like Starladder I-League Season 3 qualification stuff, or things in ECS development or EPL, he was putting up really big numbers, and so definitely catching a lot of people's attention for that reason, as being this youthful, skilled player who was consistently putting frags on the board and having good KD ratios and just good stats across everything. Granted, I will say that a lot of these online games were against weaker NA competition, to be fair. At times he was playing against premier level teams, if you're looking at like the ESEA ranking system, and playing against even some of the lesser, professional teams in EPL that were more towards the bottom of the standings. I will say that, but there were some games online where he was playing against like an Immortals or an SK, and he'd put up some good numbers against them as well. Just want to, for context, it is true that some of these big online numbers he was getting were against maybe a weaker field at times, but nonetheless, still looking good in the opportunities that he had. I mean, you can only play against the people you're put up against, and when he was up against these different opponents, he seemed to be playing pretty well. Now, what I've painted is a very positive picture of Twistzz, right? Young, a lot of skill, a lot of potential, you know, building consistency. It seemed like lately online, his online performances were getting even more consistent. He was hitting even a higher ceiling at times, getting even bigger numbers than he was before. And some of his first outings offline looked pretty good. Even when he was up against elite European competition, he could still put up numbers. But, you know, like I said, at times being maybe a bit overshadowed by a guy like Sick or someone like Automatic even back in the TSM days. And so mostly positive stuff, right? But I will say that there are some cons. There obviously is always going to be cons along with the pros for a player. And certainly from talking to people privately and then even seeing what people have posted publicly, there do seem to be some shortcomings that Twistzz will have to overcome or that Liquid will have to help develop. And I don't know how big of a problem these things are because I don't know Twistzz. I haven't played with Twistzz. I'm not in his head. I'm not in his, you know, voice client when he's playing on other teams. You know, I don't know what's going on internally, obviously. I can only work with, you know, very limited information, so you have to take what I say with a grain of salt. But it seemed like at times I would hear people privately talk a little bit about how maybe he was too passive. He baited a little bit too much. Obviously, baiting's not always bad. Sometimes it's necessary, but maybe he took it to too much of an extreme or something like that. Maybe there were times where he needed to take more initiative and he didn't. And so I've certainly heard issues about maybe just being too passive. I've also heard issues about communication and attitude and tilting and ego and things of that nature as well. And this comes from people who play with him in pickup games or former teammates or just different things like that out in the professional community. Again, take it with a grain of salt. Not sure how true all of this is, but I have heard it from multiple people. And then even being at live events that he was at and I was standing behind their team and listening in, you can sometimes pick up on little things, but again, very small sample size. I just want to say that it's a potential concern. I'm not sure how big of one it really is when it comes to things like his passive play style, maybe being a bit too passive, or his attitude maybe being a bit overwhelming and something that needs to be kind of put in check or needs to be kept an eye on. But I will say that very publicly, Hazed even put out a post to kind of support some of this on the CSGO subreddit, because he was someone who was interested in picking up Twistzz back when he was still on CLG, when they were in the recruiting process, like when they were picking up Ethan, for example, and Sub Rosa. Like other names they were thinking about picking up were names like Twistzz, were names like Sick, were names like Breezy. Obviously, those people went different directions, but still Hayes had his eye on these people because he was the in-game leader for CLG at this time period, and so he was trying to scout people and come up with ideas for people that CLG might want. And through this process, Hayes put out this statement on the subreddit, just, you know, a few weeks before I'm recording this video. He basically said that Twistzz is a well-documented baiter. His mentality and style revolves around being where the team is attacking but going in last. He's the cleanup. So you would need a team where he can do that. Liquid has Stanislaw, who is very good at that type of role already. You could have two people, but it could cause issues. I could make teams that on paper are successful, but in practice might not be. So that's kind of just some comments that Hayes had. That's just to give you one example of something that someone said publicly about some of this that I'm talking about with Twistzz that may be maybe in the con section of him as a player. I will say this, going into Liquid with some of these things, I think he could fit on this team as more of a lurker or more of a passive player. You know, if you think of the team being set up where Elige and Nitro are the entry duo, which they historically have been, you know, Elige's form has been top-notch for a long time now. Nitro had a bit of a dip in form, if we're being honest, but certainly when you look back to you know, late 2015 or mid-2015, for example, when like the Nitro-Elige entry duo were at the height of its powers, you know, that can still continue. Even if Nitro, its form isn't as good, maybe he can get better now or something. You know, maybe his form could always improve. It seemed like it was getting better lately online, I will say. But regardless, he could still be kind of an entry fragger setting up Elige then. So maybe Elige becomes the highlight of the entry duo at that point. And so Nitro can still be an entry fragger. If his numbers aren't as big as they were before, maybe he's still setting up someone like Elige. So that 1-2 punch system can still be in place. Or if you think about a scenario where JDM is going to be set up more to take more early picks and be more of an assertive opera, which is something that I think JDM wants to be, but it's just about finding a way to balance that along with this Elige entry force that you can build that also can be really big for opening areas of the map. And so it's about finding balance between where do you want to put your emphasis. Do you want to emphasize setting up JDM to take picks and open up the map, or do you want to emphasize setting up, guys like Nitro and Elise to go in and enter into a bomb site and try to open things up that way? So the point is maybe the more aggressive side of things, the more focus on entering is going to be on those 3 players at different points in time depending on the tactic, which means that does leave space for Twistzz to be more of a passive guy. On most maps you have 2 peripheral players, or you have 2 solo players. Think of Overpass, where you have like 1 guy stairs and 1 guy outside B, or think of Mirage maybe, where you have 1 guy playing the upper B apartments and 1 guy playing outside the A bomb site on defaults. These are just some examples, but on defaults typically you do have 2 peripheral role players, I guess is how I would term it. And so maybe Stan's going to be one of those guys, but Twistzz can be the other guy. Maybe Stan's a guy playing outside B on Cash, but maybe Twistzz is a guy inside Squeaky Door, or vice versa. Maybe you switch it up, Twistzz outside B, Stan is inside Squeaky Door. So you get my point. There's ways that you can make it work if Twistzz is to kind of remain being more of a passive player, more of a cleanup crew type of player. I have seen at times, though, where you can be using more of an entry role. Like there were on certain maps and certain tactics on TSM where he and Sick would just run in there, like on a heavy B execute on Cobblestone, for example, and just try to rush in there and trade frag their way into a site and just kind of swarm and trade the site with 3 or 4 players, where Twistzz and Sick were certainly some of the more key components of that entry force in that particular tactic. So you could see certain plays designed where maybe he is going to be a bit more assertive. Maybe there is a way to develop him into a role like that if Liquid so chooses to do that. It really just depends on what Stanislaw and Zeus have in mind as the leaders of this team when it comes to tactics and strategy. They're going to be the ones that are really kind of thinking about how they want to set up the team, and so it's really up to them on how they want to use Twistzz and Nitro and some of these other players and what their emphasis wants to be. I think that between Stanislaw and Zeus, you're going to have a very deep playbook. You're already seeing signs of that, even when they were using stand-ins or when Pimp was still playing. Ever since Stanislaw joined the team, you were seeing these really crazy executes, these innovative types of things. I did an interview, I did a video of one of these, and I think my first Behind the Play episode, where they were doing this really cool thing on Cash, where they were throwing smokes from outside B into the A bomb site and being able from that throwing location to kind of fake A and go B because they're right next to B as they're throwing the smokes or something. And they obviously were pulling out some tricky stuff on Cobblestone, like Fallen's old mid slope into the connector to attack B and split the site that way, and just some different smoke setups that were a little bit unique to them compared to maybe other smoke wall setups on certain maps. And so they seem to have some really nifty executes, but they also could play a bit looser in their default and kind of rely more on individual decision making by some of their key playmakers like a JDM or an Elise or Nitro or something like that. And they could play slower defaults, they could do really fast paced stuff. So the point is that it seemed like they could have a very diverse playbook. And it's important to note that Stanislaw is a very diverse player in the roles that he can play, by the way. Sure, he is a very good lurker. He's very good at cleaning up. He's very good at being a support structure. And he's a very smart player, which means he's going to probably do well in clutch situations. But there's definitely been times where you've seen him go in first and sacrifice himself to set someone else up. Even going back to the Optic days when they were known to be like a swarm and trade type of team. Yeah, sure, guys like Rush and Mixwell and even Tarek were kind of more known to be the aggressive guys on that team to open things up. But certainly there were moments where Stanislaw would be that guy to go in first and set up Rush or set up Mixwell or what have you. So Stanislaw does have some role flexibility in him, and so maybe that means even more that Twistzz could get room to do more lurking, and you can move Stanislaw in a different direction, or maybe Twistzz moves in a different direction and Stanislaw lurks. Like, I'm just saying that there's different options here, and there's really no telling what will come out of it until Liquid boot camps and plays more and practices more and determines what's the best route to take, and we get more of a sample size of watching Liquid play to see what their intentions are. But I'm saying that this move could work. I mean, I think Twistzz is certainly one of the prospects out there in the NA scene as far as his skill level and how young he is. Someone like Zeus hopefully can develop him well. I mean, I know that Zeus can be strict at times, can be demanding at times, and maybe that's what needs to happen to have some stern leadership to develop some of the youthful talent like a guy like Twistzz. So I fully have confidence that if any people out in the NA scene can develop Twistzz more and maybe try to eliminate some of these shortcomings or cons that he may have, and try to emphasize his strengths, or get more strengths on him, develop him more, make him more versatile. Someone like Zeus that has a ton of experience, you know, at high level CS as a coach, and someone like Stanislaw, who's one of the best in-game leaders in the NA scene, if not the best right now, you know, that's probably the best environment for him to develop. How much he develops is kind of up to him and his mentality, and how well he works with the team, and a lot of things that we can't know. But I certainly don't think this is a bad move. I have some reservations. Like, I don't know if it'll go as well as people think it's going to go, that there could certainly be some problem areas. But certainly if you're Liquid and you're kind of focused on picking up a player from the NA scene where there's definitely going to be no language or really any cultural barriers, and you're focusing on someone who has no problem kind of playing from a team house and being there for boot camps and being committed, if they even want someone to move into the team house with guys like Zeus and JDM and stuff like that, then this makes sense of the people out there on the market. I mean, certainly there are other really cool riflers that they could have maybe picked up in the NA scene, maybe a guy like a Breezy. You know, there's certainly other names that come to mind that maybe could have been candidates as well, depending on how Liquid wanted to set up their team. But certainly I can see why Twistzz was an attractive option to them, and it should work out, or hopefully it'll work out. As far as how Misfits is left now, just very briefly do that. The talk of the town has been that DevilDuva and Amanek, the French duo, would be joining the team in place of Twistzz and Relics, which would mean that guys like Sean Garsick and Shazam would remain on the team to play with those two French players. I have no idea how well this will work, or if it's even a thing. You know, DevilDuva and Amanek are guys that I don't really know well at all, so I can't comment on it too much. I mean, yeah, I can kind of look at their stats lines, and I can kind of see that, oh, okay, these guys have been playing for about a year and a half on lesser-known French teams, and at times maybe they're getting put against competition like a Hellraisers or a Flipside, but oftentimes playing against more obscure teams. Maybe every now and then you see them against like an Epsilon or a Fnatic Academy, but typically you're not seeing them play against big European competition. Usually it's more against French teams like an LDLC, for example, or against some of the more mid-tier, low-tier European teams in different smaller online tournaments, and maybe occasionally a qualifier for a DreamHack or something like that, like an open qualifier or something. And while they do well at that level of competition, there's really no telling what happens when they take a step up. Obviously, DevilDuva was a prospect for Envious before they picked up Scream, so there's that there. And I think Misfits were even interested during that French Shuffle time period on picking up like a team like an Envious or a G2. Maybe they were in that bidding process. I have no idea. So it seems like they had their eyes on that scene, and so that maybe they already kind of were familiar with some of these players, and so that certainly could be part of it. I have no idea how it would work if those two do join, and that's the five that Misfits roll with. No idea, honestly. I'm not even going to pretend like I know and talk out of my ass on like how good that would be, because I just don't know those two French players enough, so sorry. But it is kind of odd. You do have to wonder about language barriers. You do have to always worry about how things are going to work out. Certainly other Europeans have moved to NA to play with mostly NA teams and have done fine, like a Mixwell, for example, on Optic. But in other situations, it didn't quite work out. You know, look at what happened with like Devil Walk and Pit whenever they came to NA. That didn't quite work out, though much different circumstances. So there's really no telling how that would work out between like language barrier and you know, just, you know, the environment and things like that. Personally, I just kind of wonder, like, if you're in Sean Gares' shoes right now, I mean, do you make a play for an Optic or something? They're in need of an in-game leader. You know, obviously I know that people will have their reservations about Sean because he isn't as skilled of a fragger as like a Stanislaw was for Optic, but you have enough skilled players on Optic to where maybe Sean Gares could just come in an in-game lead and not have to frag very well. And if you're Sean Gares, I mean, you're starting to get late in your career. Do you want to make one last run with this team with like some big unknown factors, or would you be willing to try to make one last run with like one of the top teams in the region and see if you really have it in you? Just one last attempt at trying to lead a top NA team or something. And is that something that Optic would even be interested in? You know, maybe they don't want to invest in Sean. Maybe they want to invest in youth and upcoming talent. Just an idea I'm throwing out there. We'll be curious to see how all of that plays out in the end. But just wanted to do a video here talking about Twistzz joining Liquid. Some of it may have been a bit redundant, and you know, maybe I was a little bit all over the place, but hopefully you guys got something out of this video. Follow and subscribe for more content. Thanks so much.